Very good. Welcome and Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu, Melech HaOlam, Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are reading these very interesting mitzvot that involve Kohanim and the limitations and the sense in which they have to show really true love of God in observing all these mitzvot, and to really find ways to put God first in their hearts. So here we go. Lo yikrachu korcha. They should not, what it means is to shave their heads. They should not create a bald spot, berosham, on their heads, right? Maybe we should say they should not create a tonsure on their heads. Ufa'atz kanam, and the corner of their beard, lo yigalechu, they should not shave. Uviv saram, and in their flesh, lo yisretu saratet, they should not cut a groove. And there's a long Rashi on this, and I think someone needs to mute, if I'm not mistaken.
It's Harlan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me look and see. Right. Okay, I think he's muted, is he not?
No, he's not.
He's not.
And there was some kind of radio or something on in the background.
Let me find him. I see it. Okay, got it. All right. So here, lo yikrechu korcha. They should not. The best way I can think of to translate this is they shouldn't create a tonsure. Al mate, and he says so that according to the Torah Kohanim, according to the Sifra, they should not do it for the sake of the dead. In other words, as a mourning custom, as a sign of mourning. V'halo af Yisrael huzharu al kach. And it goes on to say in Talmudic fashion, but Israelites are also forbidden to do such. So let's do a kal vachomer, right? An a fortiori argument. If Israelites aren't allowed to do it, do you think Kohanim are permitted to do it?
No.
Question. No, absolutely not, right? I mean, if it's true for an Israelite, as far as something that's forbidden is concerned, well, for sure it's going to be forbidden to a priest, one would think, although it is not a totally valid kal vachomer. But in this particular thing, one might think so. But if Israelites are ela lafi shene'emar, but because with regards to Israelites, and this is a quotation from the Tractate of Kiddushin, page 36, and another place in Makot. These are all names of biblical tractates. Bein einechem, okay, it says with regards to Israelites, it says between your eyes, which would mean basically on the front part of the head, right? Yachol, maybe that would mean, this is in Dvarim, that's where it says it. So Israelites are forbidden to do this in Deuteronomy. And by the way, just to make a general observation about Deuteronomy, one of the hallmarks of Deuteronomy is things that are forbidden to Kohanim are forbidden to Israelites in Deuteronomy. There's a sort of democratization of some of these laws with regards to including Israelites and not just priests. At any rate, Yachol, so it's possible, lo yehe chayav al kol harosh. So maybe since with regards to Israelites, it just says, above the eyes in that particular location, that if an Israelite does this anywhere else on their head, they wouldn't be accountable. Okay. Talmud lomar berosham. For that reason, it says here it says berosham on their heads regarding the Kohanim, right? Vayilmadu Yisrael meha Kohanim, and we can derive the Israelite law and apply that from the priests. Bigzeira shava, with an analogy. It's hard to translate the word gzera shava. The word gzera shava is one of the ways in which the Torah is interpreted. And that is that when you look at a word that appears in one context and that identical word appears in a similar context, then you can apply laws regarding one context to the other context, even if they're not explicitly stated. So that's what we're doing here, right? So because it says, Shneemar Khan, it uses in here in the Leviticus, it talks about korcha, this word korcha, v'neemar lahalan b'Yisrael korcha, and it uses the same word. See what I mean? The same word regarding the laws concerning Israelites, it uses the term korcha. Ma kan kol harosh, and just as korcha is explicitly, we're told explicitly that the korcha, this creating this boldness, okay, applies to the entire head. Af lahalan kol harosh. So in the context of the Israelites, we say if it's using the word korcha, even though it doesn't explicitly say the entire head, we understand it to mean the entire head. And that's considered as good as an explicit Torah law. This is a Torah law regarding the Israelites. So, b'mashma, okay, and by implication, kol makom sheyikareach barosh, any place where he creates boldness on his head, period. Uma lahalan almate, and just as with regards to in the one place, regarding it's done for the sake of mourning the dead, afkan almate. So too with regards to the Kohanim, we're saying if they do it for the sake of a mourning, to observe mourning for the dead. So you can see that what we do is we equate the two contexts and
Question.
learn. Yes.
They can do it for another reason, but
So
just not for that reason.
That's what it's sounding like. That at least from a biblical standpoint, if they're not creating the boldness for the sake of mourning, it's okay. They're not held liable for the violation of this law. I do need to tell you something else about Gzera Shavas. You cannot come up with your own. This is not a type of interpretation that you can simply come up with yourself. There's a rule regarding Gzera Shavas that they have to be learned from tradition. In other words, if your teacher taught it to you. So it's a way of, because you realize that you could wildly apply this law and create all kinds of stuff. And so there's some sense of a strict application of this particular law. And presumably, if in fact they have been observing this, you could say it almost goes all the way back to Moses. So these Gzera Shavas, given the rule that's there, that it can only be learned from your teacher or from a teacher, right? A legitimate teacher in Israel, it goes back a long way.
So how does it originate then in that sense? Does that mean that it has to go all the way back?
One would think if that is in fact the application. I mean, there's a wonderful I guess I could call it a midrash about how Moses taught Torah to the Jewish people. That that he goes, there's a description, I believe it's actually in Leviticus. Let's think about it. Maybe in Leviticus. At the very beginning when we started here, I'm trying to think of a reference where he talks about how Moses, first of all, reviews the Torah with Aaron and his sons, and then they call in the elders, and so and Aaron and his sons are there, so they hear a review a second time, and then they call in others, and there's a whole bunch of repetition where Moses is teaching the Torah, and Moses is also teaching the oral Torah along with the written Torah.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this, by the way, if this is to be, if the application, the thing we have to be careful about is that oral Torah has the same authority as written Torah. And what we may be talking about here is an application of oral Torah, but it is still considered scripturally applicable, and the distinction I'm making as to calling it scriptural is as opposed to rabbinic. And rabbinic law has to do with additional strictures that the rabbis placed on scriptural law as a protection. In other words, you may have heard the expression building a fence around the Torah to protect it. I mean, look at how the Torah is violated absolutely wholesale. It's in some ways the process started by saying, well, it's only rabbinic, we don't have to be so worried about it. It's not, not divine. Well, you get rid of that and then you get rid of the next thing. Now the fact that the Torah has specific laws that get violated, people don't care, because it's a general principle of wanting to comply with law and not being a scofflaw. So part of that develops as you learn this stuff. The more you learn, I'm not saying, that objections don't get raised and stuff like that, but at least they're from learning. And if you're patient enough, there's a wonderful statement. I'm not sure if it isn't Hillel who says it, I may have the wrong authority, but something to the effect of never say about something, I will never understand it. Never say that. He says specifically, because someday you may understand, or you will understand. You've just got to be patient. And the point is, you keep learning, you keep studying, and then eventually you start to gain some understanding and perspective, and the stuff takes on a different thing. That's why Talmud Torah keneged kulam. That's why studying Torah is equal to all the other mitzvahs.
But conversely, if you're learning about mitzvot and not obeying them,
Mm-hmm.
that increases you're being in trouble with God.
True, on that particular level, it puts you in a position where you are violating on an intentional level. But nevertheless, that violating something is not, just out of ignorance is not an excuse. And you make a good point, but nevertheless, there's a better chance that you'll wind up following it if you know what you're doing wrong. And you may feel worse about it if you know that you're actually doing something wrong. But you're right, Lauren, this is definitely shaded, and there's more than one side to this.
Well, and something I find very interesting about this is the usage of the same word twice.
Mm-hmm.
And the application of something previously learned and applied is now applied to that second word.
Right.
That second time. And if you haven't bothered to study and understand that, then the interpretation of that second line by itself with that word is totally different. So
Yes.
it's so interesting.
Well, what's more of concern is that, not learning the tradition, not knowing it at all, and starting to come up with interpretations.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can really go wrong. I remember when I came to this initially, which was when I was in seminary, when I went to HUC in Cincinnati, rabbinical school. And I had actually read the Bible a few times, just read the Bible in English, essentially. And I first became aware of rabbinic commentary, of the Mefarshim, such as Rashi. Rashi is like the doyen, but there are many other commentators, biblical commentators. And at the time, discovering how fascinating and really cool this stuff was. And so often when I'd read the stuff that was of, this is all based on rabbinic material. Rashi, you could say Rashi's the Reader's Digest of the Talmud and of rabbinic material, that he picks, he selects, and he tries to put it in a way that becomes easier to understand. At any rate, he generally doesn't come up with original statements. And I used to say, oh, come on, that doesn't make any sense based on my somewhat, casual understanding of the Bible. And then I'd continue reading the Bible, and I'd read it and say, oh my gosh, how did they know that? I'd be so impressed with their ability to interpret, based on their incredibly deep knowledge of this stuff. Anyway, going on. Ufa'atz kanam lo yigalechu, and the corner of their beard they should not shave. By the way, this meaning of pa'at, that means corner, right? Where is exactly the corner of one's beard? I mean, that's not, there's some discussion as to where exactly that is on your face. At any rate, Lefi she'nemar Yisrael, and again, actually, it says in Leviticus 19 regarding an Israelite, for lo tashchit, that you should not destroy. In other words, the hair on your beard. Yachol lakto, we could say that if he collected it, right, that literally, b'malkate, in other words, if he collected his hair, he removed his hair, b'malkate, with tweezers, or rehitni. Literally, a rehitni means a plane, but I checked up Jastro, this is the reference in Jastro, a tool for shaving the hair where the hairs are removed singly, just like when you tweeze away hairs, pull out the hairs. Okay, in other words, that this mitzvah refers also to removing hair by tweezers or a plane, a rehitni. L'chach ne'emar, for this reason it says, lo yigalchalechu, they shouldn't shave. Here it is, lo yigalechu, right? Uses that verb. She'eino chayav, to teach you that he's not guilty, ela al davar hakarui giluach, except with regards to a method that is called shaving. Ve'yesh bo hashchata, and regarding that there is, in other words, you destroy v'zehu tar with a razor. And the idea is that when you use a razor directly on your skin to remove the beard, it removes other elements of the hair as well. So because when you use a razor, it doesn't remove the root of the hair, but it cuts into the skin as well. Not that you cut, although it does remove the skin. If you haven't shaved in a long, long time, I know that when you use a razor for the first time, the pain that you experience is quite intense. So for this reason, by the way, electric razors are basically okay.
I was just going to say, electric razors don't create that problem, right?
No, they don't. And that's why electric razors are permissible. So you can, so it's saying, sometimes when you look at things in a very literal way, it makes it a more, how can I say, a greater problem. In this particular case, it's making it more livable. Uviv saram lo yisretu saratet. Okay, and in their flesh, they should not cut a groove. By the way, on a Sefer Torah, on the parchment, there are these little grooves that are grooved into the parchment so that the lines are straight and stuff. If you look carefully at a Sefer Torah, and those are called sritot, same root. Lefi she'nemar, so again, we have a comparison of laws. Lefi she'nemar b'Yisrael, because regarding Israelites, it states, and again, this is Leviticus 19, v'seret lanefesh lo yitnu, and a cut, an incision for the sake of a soul, they shall not place. Meaning that, I assume by that they mean cutting yourself as a mourning, as a sign of mourning. Yachol, okay, but he goes in a different place. This isn't what he's talking about here. He says, Yachol sarat chamesh sritot. It's possible that if, and I'm assuming here he's talking about you didn't know or whatever, you cut 5 lines, 5 grooves. Lo yeheh chayav el achat. He should only have to bring 1 sin offering. So we know that you bring a sin offering when you do something out of ignorance, right? So he doesn't know about this law, and he cuts 5 grooves in his skin. And I believe it means for the sake of as a mourning, practice of mourning. And the question that Rashi is bringing here is that he would only have to bring 1 sin offering for the 5 Talmud Lomar, for this reason, scripture says, Lo yisretu saratet. That's why it's got this duplication here. They shall not cut, they shall not create grooves, they shall not create a groove. Lechayev, in order to obligate someone, al kol srita v'srita, for each and every cut, each and every groove. Why? Sheteva zo yetera, because he says this second word, saretet, okay, is unnecessary. We don't need it unless it's coming to teach you something in addition, and that's what we just learned. We learned this additional element of the law. In other words, this word, this saretet, is an additional, unnecessary word, lidrosh, in order to interpret, shahaya lo lichtov, because it could have written and made as much sense if all it meant was you shouldn't make a cut, and if you make 5 cuts, in one state of ignorance, that you only have to bring 1 sin offering. It could have just said lo yisratu. It just says they shouldn't make cuts. And I would know shehi saretet. I'd know it mean the very fact that they use this specific verb, we know it's referring to grooves.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I
Mark.
have a question.
Yeah.
Canaanites used to cut themselves while they're praying to their wooden gods.
Mhm.
I imagine that's why the good Lord says, you do not do that because I'm giving you Israel. And when you come into that country, you do not follow their laws.
Right. So that was actually mentioned quite explicitly, Harlan, in last week's Parsha, where it says you should not imitate the practices of the nations that you're going into.
Right.
It's stated explicitly in the Torah that that is not the way to practice.
Well, when you mourn a person, why do they cut their their uniform, what they're wearing, and cutting?
Yes. So it's a very good question. And the reason is that it is when you lose someone that you're close to, it's as if something is, that it's a sign of loss, that in a sense you could look at the family, right? At the family or your circle of friends as a garment, right? As a garment. And when you lose someone, it's as if that garment is ripped, because garments are there basically to give you dignity, to give you protection, to give you a place, etc. And if you think about all the implications of clothing is a very powerful element of our lives, very significant element of our lives. And so tearing the garment was a way of expressing the loss that you feel, that this garment, this metaphoric garment has been cut.
Well, Harlan is pointing out maybe a connection here.
Yes.
You're not allowed to cut your skin as a
Right.
sign of mourning, but you have to cut your clothing as a sign of mourning.
The
In
whole
other words,
issue, yes.
You don't, it's sort of, it's my parallel that I'm seeing is you don't sacrifice your own child, but you sacrifice an animal.
Yes. There's also something else, there's this whole psychological thing of cutting and why people cut themselves. And it has, I believe it's an expression of unexpressible anger that possibly, I'm not a psychologist, so I haven't studied the sort of etiology of people who cut themselves, but I have a feeling it has to do with expression of an anger because there's no other way. I'm guessing.
It's not just anger, it's unexpressible pain.
That's what I mean. Yeah, right. The point is it has to do with the inability to express in other ways. That it's the only way you can. It's a very deep psychological thing. So, right. And Shirabeth, I appreciate what you're saying. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the need to be able to parallel this destruction that you've just experienced in the destruction of a life by paralleling it in that kind of way. You don't do it on yourself. You can do it. And again, we don't look for wanton destruction of clothing either, by the way. Okay, it's in one place, but it is done in a way where you don't sew it back up. You do it across the warp and the woof of the garment, and so there's definitely the parallel there. Let's stop here, and let me go back and do this so that I'm not confused, and put it in here. Right there. Let's see if that'll work. Close enough. So we'll take a look at that tomorrow. I'm going to stop the share and give you an opportunity to make some comments if you'd like.
My comment is when I get a haircut, I'm destroying my hair some way or other. Is that wrong? I'm committing a sin?
No. So the whole point is that unless the barber is using a cutthroat razor, there's no problem at all.
And I thought it was also if you're just doing it for the sake of mourning or for a. Correct.
That's the other part of it as well. But if you want to be careful, I mean, there is some sense, and again, it's not like you start to realize that the stuff, to really understand it, requires quite a bit of study and going through the research of it. But basically, and okay, it could be that while it is not biblically forbidden to use a cutthroat razor, let's say, or direct blade on your skin, it's not for the sake of mourning. The rabbis could easily come and say, to protect that law, you're not allowed to do it at all.
For defense.
Correct. But Harlan, using scissors is absolutely permissible. There's no problem.
I thought cutting the sideburns was wrong.
So according to the ones that are very, they want to express their devotion in that particular way. All right. But how wrong it is again, you can never ever do every jot and tittle of every single mitzvah. Okay. And ultimately you wind up having to make decisions because you also want to be part of society. Judaism is not trying to create, a whole bunch of people that are separated off from society. I'm not saying there aren't interpretations that want to go in that way. We have, even ancient groups of Jews, like the Essenes.
Well, what if someone who comes, what do you say if someone comes to you and says, what do I do about my payout? What do you tell them as their rabbi, let's say?
As their rabbi, I would say, I think you have to look at your family. How does your family feel about it? Right?
Well, this person is coming to you, let's say.
Yes, they're coming to me. I would say, you need to, I would not say to them, cut off your payout. I would never say that because you have to look at the situation that the person is living in. If they're living with a group of Hasidim, all of whom wear payas, I'd say you need to keep your payas. On the other hand, if they're living with people who are going to be uncomfortable, or if it's going to come across like showing off and stuff like that, they have to take that into consideration. But no.
I mean, is there, I'm just really curious, like, are you a conservative rabbi? Is that your official affiliation?
Yeah, that's my official affiliation.
Is there a conservative ruling on this question?
Not that I've seen, okay, there may be, but I don't believe in conservative Judaism, they would ever say, you must remove your payas. They would never say that. Okay.
Or you must wear them.
Right, or you must wear them. They wouldn't go either way on that because, okay, one of the best summaries, sort of 2-word summaries or 3-word summaries of conservative Judaism, and I'm trying to think of who it was who came up with it, but regardless, it was tradition and change. In other
Yeah,
words,
but
to
yeah,
be a
but
sincere, to
that's
be,
very general. I'm
it
asking about
is,
this
of
specific
course.
case.
No, but it does nevertheless inform you on a general level as to how you deal with this. In other words, we are not running away from modernity. I think that on some levels, what is going on, at least what had been going on in Orthodoxy in the last years, say since World War II, is a fear of assimilation, a mortal fear of assimilation. And I've heard moderate Orthodox Jews, bemoaning the fact that in the past there were things that were permissible and weren't a problem, and only have become now forbidden and shunned because of this dread fear of assimilation. And I'm not saying it's unjustified, all right, but nevertheless, that's not where I'm going to stand. I don't want to cut myself off from the rest of Jewry that isn't necessarily so observant and be able to, dive into just, a society where people are ultra observant. Because I think there are many ways in which to sincerely practice one's Judaism. Do I wish more people kept kosher? Do I wish more people kept Shabbat? And not to say, we know that you can, with kashrut, there's Lubavitcher shechting, and there's this shechting, and there's according to that rabbi shechting. And I'm sure that within those groups, they wouldn't touch the meat of someone who shechted it a different kind of way. That's just simply not where I'm going to go. But not to eat pork, not to eat shrimp, not to eat, oysters.
Cheeseburgers,
At least to be on that kind of level,
cheese beyond burger.
and to try and make sure
Cheese
that the
Beyond
meat.
burger is okay.
What's that?
A cheese Beyond burger is
Yes,
okay.
Oh yeah,
it's Beyond
delicious.
Burgers, it is. Yes, it is.
Not with cheese.
Yeah, Beyond Burger's not meat.
Oh,
By the way, there's a statement saying that God created the world. This may go all the way back to the Talmud, that God created the world in such a way that every single food that is non-kosher has a kosher equivalent. That somewhere
Wow.
out there is a kosher equivalent for every treifa food. We've got to stop. It's now 8:02, and I'm trying to be mindful of time. But I hope you've enjoyed, and we'll stop the recording and take care.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you
Mahar.
tomorrow.
Yes, until tomorrow, God willing.
Thank you.
My pleasure.